Mwadhani Yagosho. Thank you, Shem, for giving me the opportunity. My name is Daniel Kariuki. More to that, I'm saved. Christ is my savior. I want to take these few minutes to possibly communicate something that was supposed to be communicated last Sunday. The whole of Kenya and the Presbyterian Church was supposed to commemorate or create an awareness day for drugs and substance use and abuse. That was supposed to be last Sunday, but because of the events that were here what happened last Sunday because of the retirement service, we were not able to do this. So I want to bring to your attention about what we were supposed to communicate to the church relating to drugs use and awareness. Tumesikia wameimba kuna dawa. So sasa tunaongea kuhusu madhara ya dawa. So unasikia Shempita anaongoza kuna dawa, lakini sasa we are also going to talk about the dangers of drugs. And when I look at us, I see people who are all glowing and our faces are all bright, isn't it? And I want to remind you that drugs is dealing with drugs is what we call a menace. And I think we want to remind ourselves of the dangers of the drugs. So the theme for the day, which was supposed to be the Drug Awareness Day, was extracted from Jeremiah 30:17a, which says, "But I will restore you to health and heal you of your wounds, declares the Lord." And we also add the words that are coming from Jeremiah 4:6, Amos 4:6, that says that my people perish for lack of knowledge. So when we are talking about the issue of drugs, we are talking about the effects of what drugs do to us and what drugs are to us. And possibly before I continue, today we said it's about the health professionals. I'm a counseling psychologist by profession. I'm not a young professional, but I'm young at heart. So I believe I belong to this service. So we are going to remind ourselves what a drug is. And we usually say that a drug is any chemical composition that alters your normal organism operation. Hello? Tumeshika hiyo? Any chemical substance or composition that changes an organism's physiology or how your body operates, or how an organism operates. So when you're talking about the kind of drugs, we have to remind ourselves of the positive and the negative drugs. So what we know and what we are familiar with, ukienda hospitali, unaumwa na kichwa ama una maumivu, there are those drugs that you are given, isn't it? We call those positive drugs. And the drugs that we see are affecting our children, and also not only our children, they're also affecting everyone in the society. They are called negative drugs. So when you're talking about the positive drugs, we want to bring to your attention that it's not only the negative drugs that are usually addictive. There are major drugs that are the positive drugs that we talk about. We usually talk about the positive drugs that can also be abused, whereby when we talk about abuse of drugs, we are talking about taking drugs without prescription, or possibly we are in an era whereby we have what we call Dr. Google, isn't it? Kila mtu anaenda hospitali, lakini ile dawa unapewa, even before you get to the pharmacy, you have been able to Google and see the side effects of those drugs, isn't it? And there are quite a number of you, possibly, who have actually saved themselves from wrong misdiagnosis or possibly wrong prescription, isn't it? So in that time when you're talking about that, it's good to have this information about the drugs that you might be using that are positive and are negative. So when you're talking about the drugs that are mostly abused, or possibly the drugs that are used mostly, we have what we call the opioids. The doctors in this and the practitioners in the house can tell me, or possibly can attest to this. These are the drugs that possibly are prescribed for pain. And those people who grew up in the villages like I do, kuna dawa moja ilikuwa inaitwa aje Suta. Mnaikumbuka? Mwameitaga ati Jabati Kerei. You know that dawa? Kwani watu ni mimi peke yangu nilelewa kijijini? There are many people. So that is one of the main drugs that was basically abused, right? Whereby unaumwa na kichwa, jabatikere, si ndio? Unaumwa na mguu, suta, si ndio? Nasikia kuna mtu alitumwa nimesikia. So there are those diclofenac. Ni boma gani haina diclofenac? There are many, those are some of the drugs that we usually continue. Then there's what we call the central nervous system depressants. And you're talking about, kuna watu wanatumia Zosat. Is that familiar? Zoloft. Selexal. Amziju hizo? Okay, fine. Most of them are used as antidepressants. Wengine wako na shida ya usingizi, tumezoea nini? Piriton. Unakunywa Piriton to a point ya kwamba Piriton moja haiwezi kulalisha. Unahitaji an extra dose, yes. Then we have stimulants. So when you're talking about stimulants, some are drugs that are for issues to do with hyperactivity, sleep disorders, just the same as those the CNS depressants. Then we get to a place whereby these drugs become so they get so deep into our bodies to the point that you now realize that yes, you're not consciously addictive to the drug, but you cannot do without it. Any example that we have an idea of? There are people who can actually possibly unaumwa na kichwa, but you cannot take a Panadol or something like headaches. So you have to go for something called like a muscle relaxer. You know them? There are so many muscle relaxers that we buy. Kuna gani? Zulu, MR, mnazijua eh? Zaito, MR, drug like Doloact. Do we ask ourselves the kind of effects these drugs usually have on us? Because it will give us a temporary relief, but it has a long-term effect. Bwana asifiwe. And we want to be notified about the dangers of such before we think about the dangers of the negative drugs that are affecting our society. When you go to the negative drugs, I would want to ask a very simple question. Which are the famous drugs that we know? All we know about marijuana, cocaine, heroin, sindio, hashish. Do you know those are corporate drugs? Are you aware? Those are for corporate people. Sisi ambao tuko huku chini, do we know what our children are using? Nowadays, we have drugs that are in form of, nani ashasikia kitu inaitwa tap-tap? Tap-tap? Kai nyinyi si wa huku haki. Kuna kadawa kanaitwa tap-tap. Mmekasikia? It's usually placed here, below the tongue, and it has adverse effects more than what marijuana, hashish, heroin can do. We also have these pills that our children and our youths are using. They only need 1 bottle of water, and they dip in the tablet. Once they shake it, it has adverse effects more than alcohol. Hello? Wazazi? Utakuwa unaona mtoto wako tu anabeba chupa. Unasema my son is, he keeps hydrating. Isn't it? Si ndio tunasema? Kuna wengine ambao hata wakifika kanisani, have you seen this? And I'm not targeting anyone with a hot water bottle. I'm not targeting anyone with a hot water bottle. But I have been into a medical institution whereby I do consultancy. As I said, I'm a psychologist, whereby the majority of the doctors, the nurses, and the clinical people all come with hot water bottles. But the question is, what is in the content? What is the content of in the hot water bottle? Somebody decides to put possibly wine, because whatever they are dealing with is just way too much. So wewe ukiwa pale, wakati unaenda pale, unaenda ukiwa wewe ni patient, daktari amewekelea kikombe yake, the hot water bottle juu ya meza, utaona tu ana sip. Unasikia nakuuliza, hii ugonjwa ilianza lini? Si ndio unauliza? Ana sip tena. If you stay long enough, you realize that this person may not be necessarily sober. But we think maybe it's a fatigue or something. People in the medical field, and it's good that this is their Sunday, are greatly affected by what we call the negative drugs, but they are using them in a very advanced way on the basis of using them to relieve work stress. Hello? Tuko pamoja? I believe what I'm saying is not alien, isn't it? We are all familiar with this. So when you're talking about the drugs that are negative, we have alcohol, we have nicotine, caffeine. Watu wa kahawa, ambao mtu wasema ati siwezi lala bila kunywa kahawa. Whenever I feel tired, whenever I have a headache, I have to take tea, I have to take strong tea, I have to take strong coffee. That is addictive. So we might think about the long-term effect when it comes to the issues of what it will lead you to, but it will give you that temporary feeling. So the question I want to ask is, when we're talking about the drugs, the negative drugs that have very adverse effects to our children and to the society, I would just want you to look at the person next to you. Have a look at the person seated next to you. How do they look? They look amazing, isn't it? Isn't it? You might be seated next to a drug peddler. Okay? That's true. Na nitaomba kuchungwa nikitoka hapa. Reason, drugs are sold by people in our neighborhood, isn't it? We are in the Sukari community. Do we know what happens in our community? Yes, we do. And those people are in our churches. Those are the same people that will go to, the kids, their children will go to the same schools with our children, isn't it? So the values you instill in your child has to be engraved by you following up on what you teach. Because if you are not careful what you teach on your child, they will be swayed by the child of a drug addict. And they are the ones that will teach them that kuvuta bangi kidogo si mbaya ndio uweze kuelewa masomo, si ndio? Kuvuta kujibebea ka tap ndivyo wakati unaenda pale kwa tap if you're an SPA student ukiongeza kwa maji utaona. Unajua there are those times I usually remember these memes that usually go around when somebody says that wewe pambana na hali yako, ati wakati mlikuwa mnafunzwa wamehesabu wewe ulikuwa unaweka rula hapa ndio uone walimu wawili. Ushaona hiyo? Imagine now somebody who is in class and seeing two teachers because of the effect of the drug that has been introduced to them. And what I want to say is, these drugs affect our brothers, they affect our sisters, they affect our parents, because there are parents also who are affected by drugs. And the reality is that nobody cares about what is happening unless it is happening to them. Mmeshika hiyo? Nobody cares about what is happening unless it's happening to them. So my reason of standing here is that I wanted to make sure that we sensitize our community. It's a long clip, or it's a long discussion that we need to have, that we all need to be aware that drugs are prevalent in our society. They are so much into, even in our homes, and we cannot walk with the belief that drugs are for less holier people. But the fact that we are in church does not save us from the risk of being affected. So when you talk about the issues or the effects or the causes that leads to drugs, one, as I come to a conclusion, they are genetics. So if you look back at your family and possibly where you come from, do you come from a family that had drugs and substance issues disorders? What we usually say, if your family or if you come from a family that is genetically predisposed, what do we say? Is that in your genes, you have a higher retention rate of age, something like alcohol. Be very careful. Whereby, mnaweza kuwa mnatembea na mtu, mnaenda mnakunywa, anakunywa chupa moja, ama mnakunywa kila mtu chupa moja, wewe utabaki na ile haja ama hamu ya kunywa kuliko ule mtu ambaye is not genetically predisposed. And in many cases whereby addiction happens, genetics usually plays the biggest contributor towards addiction. Number two, the action of the drug. If you take a mild drug, Possibly, even if you are talking about a positive drug, be it hizo diclofenac, hizo suta, hizo jabatikere, the drugs that we all positively consider as good, the action of the drug can lead you into mild or severe addiction. Emotional distress, kila mtu sahi akona stress. Mafuta ziliongezwa. Nani hana stress? So if you are to look at the issues of emotional distress, then you can find yourself getting or easily slipping into the need to use drugs so that you may be able to contain yourself. Then issues of anxiety, depression, environmental stress, and what we call the lifestyle. Our young members in the universities are being forced into the confinement of using drugs because of what we call lifestyle. For them to be accepted in their various places. So as a parent, because I look at quite a number of parents here, we also need to get to a space whereby we need to ask our children what they are going through in schools. Having those conversations, men in the house, having those conversations with our children, and having those conversations with what they may be dealing with and what they may be struggling with. It's not all about paying school fees. It's not all about asking them how they performed in their schools. Among the things that they are struggling with, other than education, is the fight between conformity and remaining holy. Hello? Mumeshika hiyo? There are challenges. I've been to places whereby kids are telling, or university students are telling me that hata unaweza dungwa sindano if you don't seem to conform. So it's a greater risk. So when you see that people are going through these challenges, please be informed that it is a menace. Bwana asifiwe. Thank you for your time. As I wind up, I want to remind everyone in this church is that we have a department in the church called the Counseling Ministry, whereby I happen to be the acting chair, and we are also in the health and the wellness team, whereby the health and wellness incorporates the doctors and the people in the health, and now the counseling team, whereby we have the mental health. And we are open to receiving people who need psychosocial support and any other need that we may be able to offer. God bless you and have a blessed Sunday.
Thank you. Let's appreciate him once again.